But the questions lingered. How did Max know what Emma needed? Was it simply his protective instinct, or was there something more? And why was it that the dog always seemed to appear the moment Emma cried? These questions began to haunt Robert. As he watched the two of them together, Max and Emma, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to their bond than just love. It was as if they shared a secret that no one else could understand. Weeks passed, and Max's unusual behavior continued. Emma, now 6 months old, had grown more vocal. Her coos, giggles, and soft whimpers filled the house daily. But one thing remained constant. Every time she cried, Max was there. He was always there before anyone else could reach her. It wasn't just the crying. Max had started doing something even stranger. Whenever Emma seemed restless or fussy, Max would sit by her side, staring at her with an almost knowing gaze. It was as if he could sense when she was about to cry, even before the first sound left her mouth. And just like clockwork, Max would appear, moving toward her with a sense of urgency that seemed far beyond any learned behavior. Robert, still bewildered by the entire situation, began to pay closer attention. The more he watched, the more convinced he became that there was something supernatural, something beyond simple instinct, that connected Max and Emma. But it was hard to put into words. How could he explain to anyone that a dog could sense his daughter's needs before even she could? One rainy afternoon, as Robert sat working in his office, he heard the faint sound of Emma crying from upstairs. He looked up, expecting Max to rush to her side as usual, but instead, he found the dog lying lazily by the living room window, his head resting on his paws. Robert thought nothing of it at first, assuming Max might have been too tired to respond. But then the crying continued, growing louder, more insistent. Max remained perfectly still, not even lifting his head. Robert's heart began to race. He rushed up the stairs and into Emma's nursery, where he found his daughter in a panic, her little face flushed red, tears streaming down her cheeks. She was reaching out for something, anything. But what struck Robert the most was the absence of Max. The dog, who had never failed to appear, was nowhere to be found. Panicking, Robert scooped Emma into his arms and paced around the room, trying to calm her. She continued to cry, her distress only increasing. He stood there, helpless, wondering why Max hadn't come. It was then that something truly strange happened. From outside the nursery window, a low bark echoed through the air. Robert froze, holding Emma tightly. Max? How had the dog gotten outside? He hadn't heard the door open. The bark came again, followed by a soft whimper. Robert's curiosity got the best of him, and he walked over to the window, Emma still in his arms. He peered outside, but the rain and the darkened sky made it difficult to see clearly. Then, he saw him. Max was standing in the rain, staring up at the window with a focused intensity. His amber eyes locked onto Robert's. The dog didn't bark again, but there was something in his gaze that spoke volumes. It was almost as though he was urging Robert to do something, to hurry. Robert didn't hesitate. Without a second thought, he opened the window, the cool, damp air rushing inside. Max's tail was wagging slowly, almost impatiently. "What is it, boy?" Robert whispered to himself, confused but compelled by the dog's silent plea. He closed the window and hurried downstairs, not bothering to grab an umbrella. When he reached the back door, he opened it to find Max standing there, drenched to the bone, his eyes still fixed on him with that same pleading look. Robert knelt down to him, his heart racing with questions. "What's going on, Max? Why didn't you go to Emma?" Max gave a soft whimper, his tail dropping between his legs. He nudged Robert's hand gently, and for the first time, Robert noticed that the dog seemed agitated, more than usual. There was an urgency, a sense of something wrong. He quickly scooped Max into his arms, noting how wet and cold he was, and rushed back upstairs to Emma's nursery. The crying had stopped, but Emma was still awake, her little eyes wide with fear. She reached out to Max the moment she saw him, and Robert noticed her expression shift from distress to calm, as if she recognized something that Robert could not. Max jumped onto the floor beside the crib and nudged Emma gently with his nose. Her tiny hands grabbed at his fur, her face relaxing as if comforted by his presence. Robert stood in the doorway, unable to tear his eyes away from the scene. He knew there was something between them, a bond that was beyond simple companionship. But the events of the day had left him with more questions than answers. Why had Max gone outside? Why had he ignored Emma's cries earlier? And what had he been trying to communicate? As Robert watched the two of them, Max, lying calmly by the crib, and Emma, peacefully nestled in her blanket, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something much bigger. There was a connection between his daughter and the dog, one that no one could explain. It wasn't just about comfort or companionship, it was something deeper, something that ran beneath the surface, waiting to be understood. But would Robert ever understand what that something was? As the months passed, Robert found himself more and more consumed by the mystery of Max and Emma. The strange bond between them deepened. Emma, now a toddler, had begun walking and babbling, but the one thing that remained constant was her connection with Max. She would giggle whenever he was near, and she always seemed to know exactly where he was, even if he was in another room. If she was upset, Max was never far behind, appearing in an instant to comfort her, as though he could read her emotions better than any human could. But despite all the wonder that surrounded their bond, Robert still couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that there was more to it, something he couldn't explain. It was as if there was a hidden truth lurking just beneath the surface, one that he was only beginning to sense. One evening, after a long day at work, Robert arrived home to find the house unusually quiet. He had expected the usual sound of Emma's laughter or the faint hum of the TV in the living room, but instead, all was still. His heart skipped a beat as he called out for his wife, Sarah, but there was no answer. Panic began to rise in his chest. He rushed upstairs to find Sarah in Emma's nursery, sitting by the crib with a look of concern etched across her face. Max was lying on the floor next to the crib, his eyes darting from Sarah to Emma with a watchful gaze. "Sarah?" Robert asked, his voice strained. "What's going on?" Sarah looked up, her face pale, but her voice was steady. "I don't know. She's been crying for hours. I've tried everything, feeding her, changing her diaper, rocking her, but nothing seems to help." Robert's stomach tightened. He could hear Emma's soft whimpers, barely audible, as though she was trying to cry but couldn't summon the energy to do so. It was a sound that sent chills down his spine. "That's strange," Robert said, stepping closer to Emma's crib. "Max isn't even." Before he could finish his sentence, Max let out a soft whine, his ears twitching as he got up and moved to the crib. He nudged Emma's hand gently, and without missing a beat, the baby's crying ceased. It was as though the dog had pressed a mute button on her distress. Robert's mind raced. This was no coincidence. The way Max reacted to Emma's cries, how he could stop her distress with such certainty. It was as though the dog understood something that no one else did. "Max," Robert whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "What are you trying to tell me?" But before Sarah could ask what he meant, there was a sudden, startling sound, a low, rhythmic hum that seemed to come from the walls themselves. It wasn't like any noise Robert had ever heard. It wasn't coming from any appliance or electronic device in the house. It was a deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards, the air thick with an energy Robert couldn't explain. Sarah's eyes widened. "Do you hear that?" Robert nodded, his heart pounding. He looked at Max, who had his head tilted to the side, as though listening intently. The dog's gaze shifted toward the corner of the room, his body tensing. "Max, what is it?" Robert murmured, his voice trembling. And then, something even stranger happened. Max stood up and walked over to the wall in the corner of the room. He stopped in front of a small, unassuming cabinet, his nose pressing gently against the wood. There was nothing unusual about the cabinet. It was just a simple piece of furniture that had always been there. But Max's behavior was anything but ordinary. He pawed at the cabinet, whining softly, as if trying to communicate something important. Robert and Sarah exchanged confused glances. "What is it, boy?" Robert asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Max's eyes turned to Robert, and for the first time, the dog's gaze seemed different. It wasn't just the look of a pet who needed attention, it was as if Max was asking for help, urging them to understand. "Let's see," Robert said, his voice shaking slightly. "Maybe there's something inside." He walked over to the cabinet, opening the doors to find nothing more than a few old toys and a blanket tucked inside. But as he pushed the items aside, his fingers brushed against something hard, something that didn't feel like a toy or a piece of furniture. His heart skipped a beat as he pulled the object free. It was a small, worn-out book, its pages yellowed with age. The cover was faded and frayed, but Robert could just make out a single word embossed on the front: the connection. He stared at the book, a wave of unease washing over him. He had never seen this book before. Where had it come from? Robert opened the book carefully, feeling a strange energy emanating from it as he flipped through the pages. They were filled with ancient symbols and markings that seemed to pulse with an unfamiliar rhythm. The text was written in a language he didn't recognize, but it wasn't just the writing that made his skin crawl, it was the illustrations. Each page depicted images of a dog and a child, connected by an invisible force, their fates intertwined in ways that seemed beyond comprehension. One illustration stood out above all. It showed a dog and a baby standing together under a crescent moon, surrounded by swirling energies. The image seemed alive, as though the dog and the baby were bound by something ancient and unbreakable, something that transcended time and space. A chill ran down Robert's spine as he looked at the final page, which bore a single line of text in English: "When the child calls, the bond will awaken." The words hit him like a bolt of lightning. Could this be what was happening with Emma and Max? Was this some kind of ancient prophecy? And if so, what did it mean for their future? Max, who had been sitting quietly by Emma's crib, turned his head toward Robert, his eyes wide and knowing. It was as though the dog was waiting for Robert to understand. And then, in that moment, it all clicked. The cries, the connection, the silent bond between Max and Emma, it wasn't just a coincidence. It wasn't just a dog's protective instinct. Max and Emma were part of something far greater, a destiny that had been set into motion long before they were born. The book had been hidden, waiting for the right time to reveal itself. And now, Robert was holding the key to understanding what lay ahead. As he looked at Max, he realized something that sent a shiver through him. This bond, this connection, wasn't just for comfort. It was a call for help. Emma's cries were the awakening of something much larger, a power that could change everything. And they were only just beginning to understand its true purpose.